All right. Hey, Justin, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Yes, thanks so much for having me on.
Awesome, man. So we were talking earlier this week and your transition of going, from working a full-time job for a long time as you work this business since 2003, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and up until today, and really getting to where you're ramping up now over the last year or so. And I'm really curious about what that transition has been like, especially with COVID, and then moving into with the market changing a bit, and how you are, setting everything up to really continue growing. Because I think it's pretty awesome, that you did 40 houses in 2022, mostly fix and flips with a couple, some wholesale and then some rentals. That's pretty awesome, man. So congrats on that.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, Justin. So if you would, for people out there listening, share your background. How did you get into real estate investing, and just share your story of getting to where you are today?
Yeah. So I was an engineer by trade coming out of college, and just got to the point where I knew I wanted to start my own business, and had a couple of experiments in that department. And it sounds cliche, but I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, right, and started flipping houses, and maintained that with a day job for a long time, for several years, and it worked really well for a long time. And I had a very kind of narrow focus on the houses I was trying to buy. I was doing a lot of kind of auction buying and pre-foreclosures and some narrow vacant houses and things like that. And it worked well for a long time, kind of got me through 2008 unscathed, more or less. And but then it just came to the point where I needed to do this full time. So I've really only been full time at it for the past 3 years. I started right at 2020, and right before the pandemic started. And so that transition for me, even though I've had the experience with being able to have my crews together and experience with all other pieces of the business, at kind of that point, I'm taking it to be more of a mass marketing type of business, where I'm focusing on generating more leads through marketing, through postcards, through a bunch of different sources, and really trying to, instead of being as really targeted as I was, now moving out to just kind of putting your name out there and getting out there, get your name in front of as many people as you can, and see what kind of opportunities that could turn up.
Awesome. So when you, for all those years that you were, working the full-time job and, having this business as like a side hustle kind of thing, how many deals were you averaging per year roughly?
Probably one a month, so probably 12,
Wow,
12 to
really
15,
good.
something like that. Yeah, somewhere in that
12,
neighborhood.
12 to 15. So, and what was that like during the transition of 2008? What did you change in your business, or did you change anything?
Well, I had a lot of rentals at that point. Unfortunately, not a lot. I mean, we're talking 20 or so, and so I did have a lot of leverage at that point. So I was keeping a lot of whenever you would get something that you could flip, a lot of times it felt like whatever you made was kind of being sucked back into all these rentals to keeping them afloat, because I had several people that moved out, and re-rented them at lower rates and things like that. But it wasn't terrible around here. I'm in the greater Knoxville area, so it went down 10-ish%. It softened considerably, but it wasn't a crash like seen in other places in the country. So it was able to stay afloat. But you kind of had to be able to feed one to keep the other from all the leverage I had, and eventually over time kind of deleveraged myself from a lot of those as the market got better.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you try to keep a couple as rentals per year, and that you've actually done that even from earlier years all the way through. I mean, it's super smart, and it makes you feel like because it's always a thing for people that, especially wholesalers, right, that do it for so many years, and they look back and look at some of those properties that they wholesaled 5 years before, like, had I just kept some of those, what they would be worth. And it's just is always kind of like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to play the tax game a little bit too. I mean, there's nothing that's better tax wise than keeping a rental and then selling it a year and a day later for capital gains. So that's sort of the game I like to play a little bit. In fact, I kind of, if I get a house that, from someone who really needs to sell, but it's not in bad shape, I'm thinking rental on that, where, it probably needs a little bit of work to flip, but it's probably rent ready with even less work. Just hold that as a rental, rent it for a year and see what happens.
Is that your
Because
only criteria, or do you have any financial criteria for the ones that you keep for rentals?
you don't want it to be too expensive, and you don't want it to be too big either, right? The big houses are the ones that when you do a really big rehab and then someone moves in, that's like rehabbing two houses again. So you want kind of we call it here a West Knox box, which is a house in the right area, but a lot of ranches with 1,000, 1,500 square feet, no more than that. And they're easy to kind of rent, and they're small, so the utility bills are small, and they're, if it doesn't need a lot of work, then that's a good candidate for a rental.
Yeah. The higher end rentals, I'm not such a big fan, especially here in Texas with the property tax being pretty high. It makes it really kind of hard to cash flow as much as we want to.
Definitely.
And I like to try to keep mine bought where we can pay any loans that we have on them off within like 10 years, which is
that right.
Keeps that price pretty far down, and typically would be the lower end, not rough areas, but just kind of lower end working class areas.
That's right. Yeah.
But so I want to talk about that transition then from moving out of the full-time job into doing this full-time. What was the catalyst for that? Why did you say, after doing that for so long, you know what, I'm going to go in full-time on this?
It was past time. It was, kind of conditions just things have changed, different personnel. It was something that I really wanted to do, but just had probably hung on longer than maybe I needed to. So it was just time. It was, I was ready to make the change, and just felt like I had to do it. You sort of know when you know.
Yeah, everybody's different, right? I spent 3 years working full-time job, getting into the business, doing roughly, like what about 10 to 15 per year. And I may have been in that job a lot longer had I not been fired.
Right.
Right. And so it was like one of those things. And I tell the story, my manager was saying, hey, I'm going to fight for you to keep you on and all this stuff. And I said, don't, I need this. I need you. I need to be let go. Just trust me, it's fine. And so that worked out pretty good. But I know the transition can be somewhat difficult. And I know a lot of people out there listening are in the situation where they're working a full-time job. And especially with this change in the market, maybe they're a little bit worried. Maybe it's a bad time to do that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, but with your having done it, from several years back in the middle of when people also were kind of worried about what was going to happen right with the beginning of COVID, nobody knew what that was going to turn into. What were the things that you knew you needed to transition going from working the business part-time to full-time? What were the things that you were sitting down saying, you know what, I need to do this, this, and this to really make this?
It really was a matter for me personally of knowing I had the capital to do it. That's being able to feel that I could independently get the funding that I needed, or had it myself if I needed to. Then also just having the income experience and know that really started to feel like I was holding myself back if I wasn't putting all my time doing the real estate part.
All right. And as you transitioned from, because you said that you were, basically, what was the exact words? You're saying direct and narrow marketing. So you were really focused on foreclosures. What were you doing before you went full time for?
Doing a lot of like foreclosure auction buying and pre-foreclosures, some basically driving for dollars, some vacant house type, it's some very narrow probate marketing, that type of thing. So really, it's almost like if anybody responded to any of the narrow marketing I was doing, almost already knew who they were because it was that narrow of kind of marketing there. So so it's just kind of keeping it very, very internal, and it was a house that I knew that I wanted before I even reached out to anybody, and kept it at that.
All right. And then, so to move into doing this where you wanted to do more and you did more, 40, you bumped up to 40 houses this year in 2022. Year's almost over, but not over yet. And so you transition your marketing. What did you start doing to pick
So
up the amount?
really got into, just the different types of marketing, and primarily direct mail, do a lot of postcards, do a lot of, additional letters and things like that, and just doing more segmentation, but also a lot more repeated mailings instead of just kind of one-offs and things like that, doing a lot more systematic approaches to getting certain areas covered, or basically I kind of do a rotating zip code mailing now that goes on in perpetuity, basically, and having enough history to be able to feel like, okay, now that's working for me, and that I can continue to do that. And basically, this past year, I said, well, you know what, if that's working, why don't I just double the number of postcards I send? So that's what I did, and that more than doubled the number of deals I got. So it wasn't like just a one-for-one type of thing. So I think you kind of get when you start multiple marketing, get multiple hits to different folks, that that you get remembered a little bit more.
And that's the good thing about having rentals as well. Kind of, you get to see what your competitors are mailing out sometimes.
Oh yeah,
right, with the
you always go
absentee
to meet somebody and they have a stack of postcards. It's probably about that thick, that they say, and then you ask them, why did you call me? And so I don't know, sometimes you were just the one in their mailbox that day.
Yeah, and then your own rental properties, right? Getting mail. Do you ever get mail on your rental properties from other investors? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
I like collecting those. It's kind of cool because you get to see how many are mailing the same piece. It's kind of crazy, right? How many people are mailing the same exact mailing piece, and it helps you to make sure that yours stand out a little bit. I don't know what you're mailing, but
yeah, I do kind of a custom postcard. It lists a lot of benefits. I like to put the person's name on the card, so it's each card has their own name on it and their property address I'm about, and just try to give them as much, as many benefits as I can to list on the card there.
Yeah, and our phone conversation the other day, it was because Kimberly on our team at Forefront CRM was telling me that you had given some feedback, that you were really loving Forefront. So I got on the phone with you because I wanted to find out from you, what is it that Forefront is helping you with, and hear your story about your transition. And that's why, I wanted to have you here on the podcast. So to hear this transition that you've had, and then how a tool like this has helped you through that transition. And you had mentioned, moving into doing more of that kind of marketing. So what kind of things were you, finding that, you were dealing with managing all those calls when you started getting more calls because you were doing more marketing? Like, what were some of the things problems that you were facing that caused you to even look for a CRM?
Yeah, so I'm my own acquisitions manager, so I answer the phone. So when you go to make that transition to being a mass marketer, right? I start with putting my direct cell phone out there on a number of different channels, which is my website. I've had have experimented with some Google ads and some SEO campaigns and a Google business profile. And so your number is out there in a lot of different places. And so when you get a phone call, if you're sitting in front of your desk, in front of your database, and you have everything you can write down and take the phone call, that's fantastic. But I don't know about you, but I'm in my car probably 2 hours a day. And so almost all, it seems like, calls that you get are important are when you're on the highway and you're going about 70 and you're trying to write down on your notepad in the passenger seat, what kind of notes and things like that. And, whether you either missed calls or got it to the point where, I'd written something down on a piece of paper, but it's in a stack of papers. And then I maybe forgot about it for a couple of days, and I promised that person I'd get back with them. And I was like, this is not how a business operates. I need to be able to have a systematic way to be able to take that call and be able to know exactly what I needed to do or what I promised to do with it, and remember all the details. I have really bad handwriting, so I sometimes couldn't even read the numbers or notes I'd written to myself. So I didn't even try to take a note and put it in my iPhone. Every time, okay, I'm going to be really rigorous about doing that, I said to myself, all right. And then, of course, you get off the call, and then that works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So, the system there was lacking for getting all these different phone calls at different hours of the day.
Yeah. And so how have things been different since you've been in Forefront
So
to manage
I
that?
just started using it in October, and so I think the thing that I liked about it right off the bat is that all those different avenues of that I'm still experimenting on, different marketing channels. You get to put a different number on each of those channels, right? So you immediately know if that person is calling from that channel. So, you know, when you do put your number out there a lot, that you get a lot of spam calls. That your spam goes up with your inbound leads too. So what you have to do there is the situation where you're getting an out of area call on your phone, and you're just like, okay, should I answer this call? I mean, I know this is spam. I know this is spam. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it could be a lead. And you're like, oh, it's spam. And you're like, why did I answer the call? But now, because I think one of the cool things Forefront does is when your phone rings, it sends you a notification that comes on with the ringing phone that says, here's a call from your direct mail. So you know that it's at least that someone calling one of your marketing numbers, and so you know to pick up. And then if that doesn't come up, you can say, well, maybe I'll let voicemail get this one because this is probably really spam because it didn't come to one of my, one of those numbers. So I think that's been really effective. And then just being able to track the numbers and what number of calls came from which lead source without even having to think about it, because you could, at the end of the month, if you're doing that by hand, you haven't really been tracking those in reality. You just have a feel for what I feel like this is working better than this, but I don't really have the numbers to. But now, you have the numbers of this many calls came in from this source, and this source, and then what their determination was.
Yeah, and that can be a tricky thing that I know for a long time I dealt with, was getting those leads from the different sources and having that kind of gut feel or that idea, like, you got roughly, I've been getting more calls from this and I know that, right? Just because I've just been answering more of those calls. But when it's not written down and tracked, you don't really have a good idea of how that's truly working. Because if you're just thinking of getting all these leads from this, what do we need to do to get more deals? Well, I need to just do more of that because I'm getting all my leads from that. Well, if you're not determining that those leads are really turning into deals as often as from another source, that could be misallocated resources, time, energy, and money into a, marketing strategy that's not really working as well as it could be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's the old adage, right? You're wasting 50% of your marketing budget, but you just don't know which 50% you're wasting. That's the thing. Before you know, it's like, so this has definitely helped close the gap for me to understand that a whole lot better.
Yeah, and then the handwriting, man, I get it. My daughter saw some handwriting of mine the other day on an envelope, and she said, "What is this, and who can read this?" And I looked at it and I said, "Well, I can make sense of most of it, but there's some words that I'd have to think really hard about what that was."
That's me right there. Yep.
Like, as long as I make that first letter sort of, understandable or clear, then the rest of it I might be able to determine. But so I get that, and so. Do you make use of the listening to the phone recordings, the call recordings?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that is very helpful because you don't feel the need to take notes, right? You can say to yourself, okay, I know what I committed to and the address of the property, the person's number. I don't feel like I have to write anything down, so I can concentrate on the call. But also too, if you listen to yourself, I mean, that's a hard thing to do sometimes, is listen to yourself. I mean, to hear, I try to improve kind of my tonality and some other things that I do on the call to, be more clear. And instead of being in such a scramble to get as much information down into one place, you can say, okay, I know I can get that later. Let's be in the moment of the call and see what this person needs out of this situation. Yeah,
that's a huge point.
I do listen.
Yeah, that's a huge point. I hadn't really even thought about that, as far as, under like seeing what it's like for somebody, you kind of point yourself away from that conversation and seeing it objectively versus when you're in it, you could be dealing with different things or even an appointment and you took the call anyway or something.
Yeah.
And you see like, hey, I shouldn't have done that because, I was just really quick with this person and, didn't really build rapport. They might be just contacting my competition rad for this because I'm sure you hear it all the time too with motivated sellers where they say, we just didn't like that other guy. And you have to wonder why they didn't like somebody, and it's usually
Right.
because the interactions were not, showing that they cared at all.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
All right. And then, so you're doing the direct mail, right? And any certain list that you're hitting with the direct mail?
No, I kind of pull my own list. I've gotten to the point where I really like pulling my own list from the county tax records and kind of focusing in on areas I like, square footage I like, length of ownership I like, that type of thing. It's actually a funny story that I really, I didn't have a ton of success pulling lists, so I kind of got away from that because in one example was I bought a list of people that were supposedly behind on their mortgage. And so, certain area, whatever. And then I get a call from my dad, who he lives on a $1 million house on the lake that's paid off. He said, I got one of your postcards today. Will you send me a postcard for it? I was like, oh, you're supposed to be behind on your mortgage. And he said, yeah, I don't have one. So,
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
And there's something to be said for that too, because you're pulling a list that, takes a little bit more effort, right? And most people aren't willing to do that. So you're probably hitting some people that other people just aren't hitting.
Yeah,
because they're not.
That's sort of my feel. I'm kind of, and I'm trying to shoot have a broad swath of people that I'm hitting too. And I think it's kind of a numbers game in some ways. You never, if you hit enough people with houses that that you like, that a lot of times that hits them at the right time. And there's a lot of things that too you can't tell from data about what's going on in a person. A house that's appears to be occupied, taxes are paid, it's not on any vacant list, not divorced, or they don't hit another list, but for whatever reason that person has a situation that needs a cash deal, and they want to they want to relocate, they want to do something else, and that hits them at the right time. And you couldn't have told that from any sort of data point that you could see from our side of the table when you're trying to pull a list and be a lot more focused.
Right. Yeah, sometimes there's not something that's obviously known by reporting agencies or something that are showing that motivation. And those tend to be the best ones, I think, like the best types, especially if they've inherited the house 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
Right. They never paid it down. There was no sweat equity. They lived in it. They got use out of it, and they're just ready to move on.
That's right. And it usually hasn't been updated at all since then. And those are absolutely.
Yeah, I love those. That was kind of one of those things where, when we did a lot of different marketing, we'd look back and say, of all these deals that we ended up getting, not the leads, but the deals that we got, were there common factors or common things from those sellers, that we can maybe target in some other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was interesting because it really was that fact of most of them had inherited the property at some point.
Right. Right.
And not recently for most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that without a doubt. Definitely. Yeah.
So I never really did determine a good way of finding, the good list for that, but or finding a way to target that. But definitely, I'm sure somebody listening to this will run out and find a way, but
yeah, let us know.
Yeah. Right. And you had said also that you were doing SEO, right?
Yeah, so I did a couple of different campaigns. I did some Google ad campaigns, some SEO campaigns, and have tried and experimented with a couple of different things. But that's been sort of hit or miss for me. I haven't quite found the right solution for that. For me, it's just just tried a couple of different things, and the results have been different. And kind of there's this gap too. So usually you will meet with somebody who's running that for you, and they'll kind of give you your numbers for the month, and they'll say, okay, well, just to pick a number, you got 10 calls off your website. Hey, that's great. And you say to yourself, well, I didn't get any deals off my website or my ad or my business profile or whatever it is. So you're like, that doesn't seem to add up a lot of times. So there's this kind of connection or disconnect rather between what someone will say, you're getting a marketing from this, you're getting calls from this channel, and then you're saying, well, I'm not getting any deals from here, but there's no way to measure from here to there, and that's the problem. And so I would go several months and just thinking, is this working or not working? It feels like they're saying it's working, and I'm not getting the deals that it's making it cost effective for me. Where is that? But so when you you kind of put the forefront in between there, so you can start to track, okay, of those calls, and you can line up the calls and when they were supposedly coming in, and now they're using your tracking numbers, and you can say, and what I found is that for a lot of advertising solicits a lot of non-lead generated calls to you, which are people soliciting you for their services. So if you're running a Google ad campaign, you're going to get calls from people selling you different Google ad campaigns, right?
So it costs any money too.
Yeah. So when you were doing that before without tracking, you're like, those calls don't even register to me as marketing calls. They're just, I thought they were just spam. I didn't know how they got my number. I just figured they got it somewhere, but they're going through your Google Ads number. And so now you're like, okay, so really those, pick a number, 10 calls, whatever, really 4 of those or 5 of those weren't even really leads. So what am I paying for? And why is this, why is this something I'm moving forward with? But then also too, there are people that call you for different reasons. So example, just today, I've got somebody that called me off of my website, and it rang off the forefront like it was a good website number, but it was a person who lives next to a house that I bought to tell me that people are going into my dumpster at 5 o'clock in the morning and rummaging through it and trying to get scrap metal.
Oh, yeah.
So that's obviously not a lead either. So
right.
That was just this morning. So
yeah, they needed to find you or something.
They just needed to find you, right? And it's just an informational call, so they're not all spam either. So that really helps bridge that gap when you can say, okay, here's how many calls I got, and here's how many were leads, and you really want to pay for the leads, not just the calls.
So did you set up the separate statuses for those non-leads? Do you have like different statuses like spam or telemarketer or?
Yeah, I do like,
the same thing,
yes, spam, and then that's if they're selling me something. Then the do not contacts, where they called and say, please don't contact me anymore. And then also just I put an informational status there. So if that was somebody who needed some information from me, and so it wasn't really either of the other two. So I use those 3 primarily as the status for those types of calls.
Cool. So is that, I bet that feels a lot better when you have, especially because SEO, I'm sure you're paying a good amount of money for that. To be told like, this is how many calls, and you can come back and say, yeah, that many calls, but those are not, they weren't leads.
That's right.
Maybe 2 of those were leads. And so we need to do something a little bit more,
That's
so,
right.
So you can come
really
back.
Bridges that gap there, definitely.
Right. That's awesome. And then you showed me earlier your database. You said you do some follow-up. You want to talk about the follow-up that you?
Yeah. So I do a lot of Excel, but this is also my database right there. It's about a 3-inch stack of printouts of people that I would like to contact. You come across deals that are potentially good deals, and that you want to be more proactive and do more than just a periodic mailer, that you want to contact them via phone or text or anything like that. And it's a deal you think that they would benefit from, and maybe you've even been by it, that type of thing. So, for me, during this past couple of years, I wouldn't say it's really a trap, but I've gone into, I would say it's kind of a trap of going and following the leads that are the hottest leads, and that's what you focus on. So you're doing foreclosures, you have a foreclosure sale that's coming up, you got to react to that time pressure, and so those always go to the top of my list. And then these other houses, that are vacant, that you follow up with people on, that you have to call, and you don't really love cold calling people anyway, so you kind of put that at the bottom of the list, and next thing the time goes on, and you feel it's okay to kind of forget about those. So my goal for next year is to really kind of build those into my process using Forefront with the automated follow-up sequences. I haven't gotten that part yet installed, but that's where I need to be. I need to be putting these guys in there, following up with them, where I don't let myself forget and let myself kind of let it slip. And then when I do my year-end audit of my database, see that they sold it to somebody else. That's the real kicker when I do that database audit every year, and it's like,
that's a painful thing to do.
It's a painful thing to see, the bought at a price that you would have bought it for. So
right. Yeah. And do you have, some people have some hesitation with doing some of the follow-up? They feel like, I don't know, just like, do you have any hesitation in automated follow-up or long-term follow-up in general? I mean, if you did that once a year, but didn't do it more often, is there some hesitation from yourself, do you think, to follow up?
Well, I don't, they would be on a periodic mailing list anyway, so they're getting marketing from me. But the periodic follow up, I think if they have not responded, or you can still kind of look and see if things change. I don't mind doing the automated part if I haven't heard from them yet. But once we have a communication started, I do more of a manual where I have to write myself tasks to where I need to call this person by the end of the week, and that's how I would go from there. So because I like having a little bit of a personal touch than sending something automated to somebody who's I've actually talked to. So I guess
Yeah,
that's
that's a
where I
real,
would
that,
see how I
yeah,
draw the line.
yeah, that's a real good point. I do the same thing. I feel like those calls are kind of required at that point. So it's just task, do those calls.
Yeah,
And that's one of the reasons why we also built in the thing where if you're doing automated and they respond,
that's
it
right.
automatically pauses your automations so that you're not,
Absolutely.
talking to
Yeah,
them
you're
and then
not
they get a
sitting,
text message an
"Hey, I
hour
haven't
later
heard from
saying,
you in a day."
"Yeah, I haven't heard from you." Not
Yeah,
professional, right? So
yeah,
that prevents that from happening. And why do you think it is that we added that? Because
yeah.
we've experienced it.
It happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh crud, this
Yeah.
isn't cool. So yeah, that's did you, like, based on the past of your going through those old leads each year, and digging into them, are there any that come to mind that you remember kind of buying that you never thought you would or something?
Um, yeah, I mean, sometimes if you go back and look at and ones that I'd kind of given up on, but I kept them on a monthly mailer list. I think I'd maybe sent a couple, like 10 or 11 postcards. And I just kept it on the list. And then one day out of the blue, they called and said, "I keep getting a bunch of postcards from you. I think I'm ready to sell this house." And then we
Nice.
met and we bought it. So I think that happened twice within this year or so. It just kind of the persistence of the mailing kept it, eventually they were ready to sell. But I'd kind of given up on trying to contact them directly. So I wasn't doing any sort of follow up via phone or text. I just kept them on a monthly mailer list, and eventually that worked.
Yeah, you can save some of that money now once you once you get some of the
That's right.
text and
Yeah.
stuff done. And what I like about having a systematic way of doing that too, because you can continue to do postcards and stuff if you do like a webhook as part of the sequence, to send those kinds of things. But what is good about it is you can start to see, okay, I'm getting, like, especially when you text or something, if you start seeing people responding in a negative way, saying, you keep bugging me, all this kind of stuff. Of course, you're going to get some people like that, right? There's just,
Absolutely.
even with mail, you're going to get that. But if you're seeing a pattern where that doesn't happen until this certain message goes out, then it can be like, well, either my timing of this message or the message itself is a problem. Right. It's annoying people somehow, or it's really turning them off. And so you tweak it. And so with that aspect, you're improving it over time, right? You're improving your system, over time, because you have something that you're doing in a systematic way.
That's right. That's right.
That's repeating.
Yeah. And not just relying on, memory or, hey, I remember to do it.
Right.
You do the same thing every time and see what happens in the system. Yeah, absolutely.
Over the last, I started in 2003 as well. And I've been through periods of, the long time wanted to just do it myself, run the business myself, have the freedom that comes with that, and was so busy I didn't really have the freedom a lot of times.
Yeah.
To growing a bigger company, having the acquisitions people, having lead managers, lead intake, all that kind of stuff, and transaction coordinators, all that kind of stuff. And then back to just doing it on my own again. And, I don't think I'll ever go back to the bigger team.
Right.
And what are your thoughts on that? Do you have hopes of building a team, or at least bringing one person on or something? I mean, what do you have any thoughts on that?
So my wife helps me with some of the list management and some other things like that. But I think that I would like to bring on a VA to be able to train them to take off the real kind of drudge work of doing the behind the scenes list management that you're sending to, here's the list I want to send to my postcard company, and here's the list I want to do for this mailer, and doing some research and kind of the follow up for houses that you want to do the research on for skip tracing and that type of thing. So I do my own skip tracing and try to do some deep dives on certain houses and being able to offload that a little bit, because the part that I like meeting with sellers, and I like feeling like I help, every person that bought a house from me has thanked me at the closing table, that helping them, and I get some enjoyment from that. So I don't feel like I would want to sub that out to someone else, because I think too, when you call my company, I definitely give you a personal touch. I try to understand your problem and I'm there to solve it. So I don't know, I don't need to or want to, spend all day doing nothing. I like doing what I'm doing. So doing the work is actually fun for me. But I do want to offload for sure, and just be more systematic about the part that's kind of more behind the scenes in the computer, doing that kind of work. So that's another thing that I'm targeting for getting this year is probably moving into the virtual assistant with some help. But I need to better define the processes that I do every day, so I can give that person a standard operating procedure on here's what I need you to do this week and how to do it. So
yeah, my bad hires, that was the problem. Almost always that was the problem. It wasn't clear enough what I was wanting, and I didn't like training people. So I do as little as possible training and just kind of saying, figure it out, find your way through. And it's not good.
Yeah. Well, it's always like you're trying to fly the airplane while you're building it, right? It's always the thing, I have to get this list out this week because that's my process, but I have to do it, so I don't have any time to build the instructions for how to do it because I'm doing it. So I have a hard time, I think, getting that separation so that I can have more people do things for me instead of me doing it myself.
Yeah. And I think, having the format, the media, or the way that you put those processes together have to be something where somebody can easily find it and use it. Otherwise, it's also just something in a binder that nobody's looking at, right?
Right.
And so doing that, and I don't know, we use Tetra, TETTRA.com. They used to have a free, I don't know if they're still free or not, but it's pretty inexpensive if not. But it's nice because, you can have your processes in there. And then if somebody wants to, comment on it or suggest an improvement to it, there's a spot to do that, right? And then get notified and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of organizes those thoughts and improvement of, kind of encourages improvement of processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that way you can also have a way of approving changes, right? So if you just tell people change them as you need, well, that could be a problem.
Right.
Where they're doing something that you've learned before is not good to do.
Yeah.
That becomes a problem. So just to close it out here, I want to find out, what are your thoughts on the market, and are you doing anything different?
My area, it has definitely softened, just like everywhere else, but I don't just like in 2008, it did actually go up considerably here. I mean, our prices have almost doubled in the past 3 years. And I would say prices have softened maybe 10% or so. I think we discussed that when I talked to you last week. I now have a real estate license too, so you get a lot of the metrics that the Realtor Association puts out, so you can kind of study those. And in 2011 or 12, in my area, in my MLS, when it was at the bottom, there were about 10,000 or so active listings, and at the hottest it's ever been, which is February or March of this year, there were about 1,500 listings. So if you take the 1,000 out, you can almost grade the market between a 1 to 10, give it a 1 to 10 grade. And right now there's about 4,000 or so listings. So it's kind of in the middle. So it's still, but the houses that I'm closing on this week and last week, I went off of list price and was ready to get them moved. By about $10,000, $15,000, but still not paying any closing costs. So I still, you kind of put that equation back in. It used to always be in your model, like you'd expect to pay $3,000 in the buyer's closing costs with everything you buy. And then that kind of went away. And I think it's coming back, or at least, also too, the market has really brought out the bargain hunters. The people who are out shopping now, I think, are people that sat it out because this is too crazy. And now they're like, okay, now I'm out to put some lowball offers, and they're not even necessarily lowball offers, just offers below list. The people aren't afraid to offer below list price now. So for here, it's it's interesting to see what's going to happen next year. I've been investigating doing some rate buy downs. I don't know if anybody's had any experience with that working. I've heard that's a good technique. I've got a house that's kind of sitting, but it's got some other issues. It's in a neighborhood that there's actually the builder still building, so I'm kind of can't really price it below what they're building them for. So they've got a couple of those will be finished out, and some other things. But more or less, I think you can get them sold, but knowing that you'll do either concessions or a kind of a price discount.
Yeah, knowing that up front and being willing to do it instead of waiting for a long time. And yeah. Well, and are you staying away from any price points? I mean, you don't have to get specifics, but are there certain, because I know here we get into the thing where houses that are up over 400,000 plus in a down market tend to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, I try to stay in that first time home buyer market, which around here is now somewhere in the 250, 300 kind of median price range. It used to be forever. It was 150. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? It's still hard for me.
Yeah, I can't believe it either. I mean, that's the first time home buyer. I mean, that's the median house price here. So kind of staying there and around there and below. Yeah, I don't have a lot of exposure to high price, because that again, going back to kind of your list management, I don't ever market or mail to people with the higher end houses. And I know some people that do really well and make a lot of money per house, but there's not a ton of volume in that. And then also I think the risk part is there, but there's a lot of influx in my area from out of area here still. And so it's keeping prices stabilized. So I haven't seen a lot of upper end market go down, which I would have expected. So that hasn't happened just yet.
Well, good. I appreciate you, Justin, and you being on the show and sharing, your story and, your transition from being part-time in the business to full-time more recently, and your insights on that. And I think it's been really helpful with some good nuggets in here, as far as, being able to operate the business in a way where you kind of know what's going on a lot more and can handle things in the right way and systematic way. That's going to help a lot of people listening. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to reach out to Justin, would you like to share any way for them to contact you on the show? Or
I mean, you can also reach my number on my website, ReliantHomeBuyersTN.com, and I've got a number there if you want to dial that up, and feel free to give me a call.
Awesome. And he'll be sure to mark that as a non-lead, but
that's right.
But yeah, and I'll put that on the show notes page. It's going to be flippingjunkie.com/226. flippingjunkie.com/226 will get you over to the show notes, and you'll be able to see the link to that website and his Facebook page as well. And if you felt like what Justin shared was really helpful, and it's going to gave you some things to really improve your business, help him out, and on his Facebook page, maybe recommend his business or recommend him as somebody that's knowledgeable in real estate or something. And that way you can help him too, to give back a little bit. All right. Well, thank you, Justin.
All right. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.
All right. You too. Bye.